In spite of the fighting in Massachusetts and Canada, few colonists actually wanted independence from Britain. Most were still loyal British subjects. They just wanted Parliament to recognize their rights and give up its hateful policies. The Olive Branch Petition. Many Americans pinned their hopes on peace with King George III. Once the king understood their position, they told themselves that he would convince Parliament to change its policies. In the summer of 1775, Congress sent a petition, a written request, to George III, swearing loyalty and begging him to help end the quarrel. John Adams called his petition the Olive Branch Petition because olive tree branches are an old symbol of peace. The king refused to even read the Olive Branch Petition. The Battle of Bunker Hill had been the last straw, declaring that the colonies are now in a state of rebellion. He called for Parliament to prepare for war. Common sense. With the rejection of the Olive Branch Petition, colonists faced a difficult decision. They could surrender and hope that the British would show mercy, or, on the other hand, they could choose to fight for independence. Were the colonies ready to take such a bold step? It was Thomas Paine, recently arrived from England, who took the horror out of the idea of separation. Early in 1776, Paine published a pamphlet called Common Sense. In it, he argued passionately that America had nothing to gain and much to lose from remaining tied to Britain. Everything that is right and reasonable pleads for separation. The blood of the slain, the weeping voice of nature cries, "'Tis time to part." Paine's words electrified the colonists. Within a few months, readers had snapped up more than 100,000 copies of Common Sense. Paine pointed out that independence would give Americans the freedom to set up their own government and trade with whomever they pleased. They could shape their own future. Suddenly, the idea of independence began to seem sensible rather than unthinkable. "I find common sense is working a powerful change in the minds of many men," observed Washington. The Declaration of Independence. In the spring of 1776, Congress appointed a committee to prepare a Declaration of Independence. The task of writing it went to 23-year-old Thomas Jefferson, who said little but could speak brilliantly with his pen. Jefferson's job was to explain to the world why the colonists should separate from Britain. His arguments were simple but revolutionary. It began with the statement that all people have certain natural rights. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. People created governments, argued Jefferson, to secure these rights. If government fails to do so, it is the right of the people to later abolish it. That is just what the Americans intended to do. Jefferson went on to list the wrongdoings of King George III. The king had not done, he wrote, allowed laws necessary for the public good. He had taxed Americans without our consent. Now he was waging war against us. For these and other reasons, declared Jefferson, these united colonies and of the right ought to be free and independent states. By July 2nd, the Declaration was ready for Congress to debate. Most delegates liked what they had saw, except for the passage on slavery. Jefferson charged the king with violating the sacred right of life and liberty of a distant people by carrying them into slavery. Almost no one in Congress supported this charge. Southern delegates worried that it might lead to demands that the slaves be freed. Even delegates who opposed slavery felt that blaming the king for slavery was unfair. The passage was struck out. On July 4, 1776, Congress approved the final version. In doing so, they promised to support the cause of independence with our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. John Hancock, president of the Congress, signed the document with a flourish. By approving the Declaration, the delegates showed great bravery. If the new free and independent states failed to win the war, these leaders would be hanged for treason. Benjamin Franklin joked, "We must all hang together, or most assuredly we will all hang separately." Not everyone in the colonies supported the Declaration. Only about a third of the Americans called themselves patriots. Strong supporters of independence, another third were loyalists. Colonists who did not want independence were loyalists. They saw themselves as law-abiding people, faithful to the king and country. The last third did not want to risk their lives or their property by taking sides in the struggle. Disagreements over independence Pitted neighbor against neighbor, friend against friend. One of John Adams' closest friends was the Loyalist. Ending that friendship, wrote Adams, was the sharpest thorn which I ever set my foot. Even families were divided. Franklin's son William was a Loyalist, much to his father's distress. African Americans in the war. For African Americans, the Declaration of Independence raised hard questions. If all men are created equal, how could there be slaves? Would independence mean that African Americans who were slaves would be freed? Should African Americans join the Patriots in hopes that society based on equal rights would end slavery? Many African Americans did join the Patriot cause. Black Minutemen fought at Lexington and Concord. When the British stormed up Breed's Hill, they were fired on by black as well as white patriots. When Washington first took command, however, he did not want African Americans to join the army. He feared it would encourage slaves to leave their owners. The British, on the other hand, promised to free the slaves and patriots if they escaped. Thousands of slaves answered the call. A shortage of white volunteers soon forced Washington to enlist black soldiers. Some 5,000 African Americans fought on the Patriot side. Indians in the war. The conflict divided not only white Americans and black Americans, but also Indians. Most Indians remained neutral or sided with Britain, who had hoped it would defeat them against land-hungry colonists. However, some helped the Patriots. Within the Iroquois Confederacy, most of the Seneca, something and something else, and the Mohawks sided with the British. But most of the Onondagas and the something else helped the Patriots. The war divided many Indians families as well. The Onondaga warriors, for instance, was captured by his brother, a British supporter, who then handed him over to the Seneca to be killed. In the end, the war would bring neither Indians or African Americans the reward they thought. Even worse, Indians who sided with the Patriots would soon find their lands taken by settlers. Meanwhile, thousands of slaves who had joined the Continental Army were returned to their masters after the war. British strengths and weaknesses. In preparing for war, Britain was confident of its strength. It had a well-trained army and would soon be joined by 30,000 mercenaries, soldiers who fought for money. These mercenaries were called the Hessians because most of them came from the Hesse-Kassel, a part of Germany. Surely the Redcoats and the Hessians would crush the Continental Army. Meanwhile, the mighty British Navy would rule the sea, landing troops and supplies anywhere along the coast. Still, the British faced huge problems. One was the distance between Britain and the Americans, sending troops and supplies across 3,000 miles. The ocean was slow and costly. The second problem was that the colonists were fighting a defensive war to protect their land. The British could not stamp out the rebellion, but simply capture a few cities. They would have to break the Patriots' will to fight. American strengths and weaknesses. The Patriots had their own weaknesses. One was a lack of money. Having refused to give Congress the power to tax, the 13 newly independent states squabbled over how much each should pay for the war's effort. As a result, the army was consistently short of weapons, clothing, and food. The army also lacked experienced soldiers. Frustrated by low pay and eager to return to their farms and workshops, many enlisted for only 6 months to a year. Just when they were learning to be soldiers, they picked up their muskets and went home. The army did slowly improve in discipline, skills, and confidence, largely because of great leadership. George Washington inspired the respect of his soldiers. Their faith in him to lead held the army together. Patriots' leadership also shone overseas. Through the Continental Navy had just a few ships, daring captains like John Paul Jones scored stunning victories. What kept the Patriot cause alive, though, was the dedication of the ordinary people who gave their lives and property to gain independence. These people were soldiers like Joseph Martin, who kept re-enlisting. They were the seamen of the privateers, privately owned ships that attacked enemy ships and ports. They were the Patriots at home. Hamer Solomon, for instance, gave his fortune to Congress to help pay for the war. Women in the war. Women helped the war effort by keeping farms and workshops going and working as camps and cooks and nurses. An artillery officer's wife named Mary Ludwig Hayes often carried water to thirsty troops during battle. This act of courage and kindness earned her the nickname Molly Pitcher. A few women, like Deborah Sampson, even dressed as a man to join the army. The Patriots' strength was not in numbers, but the dedication and leadership of those who remained faithful throughout the darkest days of the war. Without them, the struggle would soon have been lost.